There was a slip in standards, too. For a group always intent on maintaining its excellence, it was a painful lapse in professionalism, and they knew it. Really? Stephen D. Stark? A painful lapse in professionalism. A painful lapse in professionalism! What? Hi, I'm Lars, and this is my land. In my land, I get to do pretty much whatever I want. And today, I'm going to tell you why Beatles for Sale deserves justice. And you're going to listen, because it's my land. Welcome to Annoying Memos Land. Beepity beep beepity beep beep. If you're new here, I talk about the Beatles, but I have been known to drop a 7-hour video on the TV show Lost that I worked on for so long that if I don't mention it in every video I do, a kid is going to turn on the noisiest toy in the known universe, and I know that I cannot run as fast as John Krasinski. He's like the Tom Clancy character boy, right? What's his name? This is an important note. 7+ seconds of copyrighted music usually leads to a copyright claim, and in my experience, leads to my videos being blocked from viewed by anyone, anywhere. I have to play by these rules or else my videos just don't exist. So if you want to listen to music, I offer more complete reactions with a lot more music and sometimes more interviews, etc. It's patreon.com/LarsLand. And if not, I would absolutely love it if y'all would like and subscribe and all of that jazz. It helps me out a whole lot and it is free. Now let's get back to my land. Beatles for Sale personally means a lot to me, and that's why I got a little bee in my bonnet when I read that book, but I do want to mention that this is Meet the Beatles by Stephen D. Stark. It's not a bad book, okay? By the way, I do my best to make sure that all of my videos are as listenable as possible because I also like to do my chores while listening to idiots. I can fill that slot for you. However, I will often add information on the screen and you will hear it with a click. It sounds like this. If you want to get in my comments and be all me, it's not my fault if you miss the click. It's not my fault if you miss the click. Any big corrections? Always in a pinned comment. I do my very best to be as thorough and as accurate as possible. It's important to me. I have a shit ton of sources and they're always linked in the description box. But in sincerity, Beatles for Sale beats hard through Larslandian veins. It's the Beatles' 4th studio album, recorded in 8 days, sporadically in between tour dates and interviews, photo shoots, appearances, anything else in the latter half of 1964, the undeniable height of Beatlemania. Of the 14 tracks, 6 of them are covers, and yes, sometimes I do condense quotes. Usually full quote is always on screen. In this case, I condensed the quote for the intro joke, but I would like to read it now. There was a slip in standards too, as the group added 6 covers of other songs, like Mr. Moonlight, because they had run out of their own. For a group always intent on maintaining its excellence, it was a painful lapse in professionalism, and they knew it. So that's the full quote. It's a lot of covers, okay?
And it's got 8 of our songs, and the rest are, 8 from 14, what's that, 9? Please.
No, 6.
I'm not very good at counting.
So I see.
6, of course, 6, yes. 8 and 6.
How many G's?
It's a lot of covers, but that's not nearly as lazy, disinterested, or unprofessional as all of the reviews and the retrospectives will have you believe. In a happier, better world, I wouldn't have to defend the Beatles' use of covers, but I do because it is the weakest point of the album, just across the board. That's what everyone says. The Beatles were trailblazing with their own material. This is something that other groups were not doing, not to this extent, not to this scale. If we're looking at comparisons from the Beatles to Elvis, for instance, Elvis didn't write his own music. He was still in the world of having his producer, management team pitch songs to him from songwriters. And from those, he would choose what he liked. Nobody's calling Elvis lazy. It's just that he didn't start out writing his own music. He started out performing his music. So performing, singing, playing instruments, still a talent. It's still work. It's certainly not lazy or a painful lapse in professionalism. It's being the Beatles. It's performing. It's being a musician. Blasting using covers, especially in the mid-1960s, is incredibly dismissive of all of the artists that came before the Beatles. It is such a shallow criticism. It means nothing to me. If you prefer the originals or the first big hit, the originals are usually performed by a lot of people until one gets really big. That is totally fine. But it doesn't mean the Beatles were slacking off. They couldn't have slacked off, even if they wanted to. It was not possible.
We made a record, we played a live gig, we did a photo shoot, and then we had lunch. And then we started the afternoon. I mean, it was busy.
That they're running through this, barely any sleep, get up, do it again, running on adrenaline, they're going, height of Beatlemania. As a very specific example, it's similar to the expectation of the Harry Potter books. Every book gets longer than the next. The 5th book, super long. The expectation would be that the 6th book would be longer. It's significantly shorter. What a disappointment. And then the 7th book is still shorter than the 5th. My expectation growing up was like, I wish it was longer. We deserve more. Is it somehow not a book because it's shorter? Is it less worthy as a book because of the length? But there's a similarity there. I know that's kind of a dumb comparison, but it's equally as silly.
Today, the Beatles return from America, where they played 32 shows in 34 days in 24 different cities.
Can we rewind to that 8 days thing? 8 days. I mean, 7 if we aren't including the singles, but we are including the singles, but also 10 days if we're including the mixing sessions. Can we all agree that it's impressive? Okay. When availability arises from August 11th to October 26th, 1964, the Beatles record the album in what my grandfather called nibs and nabs. Just here and there, whenever you can. Nibs and nabs. It sounds like exactly what it was. The Beatles were being pulled here and there. Tour, sell.
Drive to Birmingham to do a gig. End up in a nightclub. We were just doing 4 or 5 things a day.
George Martin, the Beatles producer, and Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager, both instrumental in the Beatles' success, had decided at the beginning of everything that the Beatles should put out a single every 3 months. So A-side, B-side, right? And then an album every 6 months. We're coming up on 7 right now. A Hard Day's Night comes out July 10th, and we're gunning for a December release. Months upon months of the Beatles touring, recording, yada yada, left the Beatles exhausted, and boy oh boy, do we hear that in every account of this time regarding Beatles for Sale. I'm gonna actually go tired, wearied, beaten, done, beat, knackered, aweary, tapped out, played out. They're touring all over the world. I was going to get into the dates. I decided not to for obvious reasons. That's a whole different video. And I have to wonder if everyone around them noticed, but no one thought to tell the Beatles. Tony Barrow, the Beatles press officer from 1962 to 1968, said in his book, "The boys played over 50 shows in just under 5 weeks, bringing out mobs of ardent Beatle people who caused the streets to be closed adjacent to the theaters and kept the group's fellow hotel guests awake half the night. Such riotous scenes generated front-page stories wherever we went, but the whole affair must have appeared pretty tame to John, Paul, George, and Ringo after the much larger places to which they had grown accustomed in North America." And he must have been right. What he's talking about is when the Beatles came back from their North American and worldwide Australasian tour, they completed some of their agreements from when they were much smaller, tours around the UK. This was kind of like a laughed at thing that Brian wanted them to do. He wanted them to appear professional. But rather than the Beatles scoffing it off, they kind of viewed it as a duty and something that they were proud of. This is from the Anthology book, so that's like mid-1995. This is what George and Ringo said. George said, "In October 1964, we started another tour of Britain. We had a lot of shows booked from before, and so having played huge stadiums in America, we were now coming back to Britain and playing the Working Men's Club in Accrington. Sorry, I am always mispronounce things, and I get stupid defensive about it. And playing the Working Men's Club in Accrington for a tuppence a month. After having some success, we still fulfilled the obligations that we had before we got really famous. That was one of the things everybody was proud of." Ringo said, "It was the same in 1963. That was a great thing with Brian. If we'd been booked to play a small club anywhere, we still went and played it for the price agreed originally. We were honorable folk." Sorry. No, I love the Beatles. It's funny. It's just funny. Okay. And so was Brian. No, it's a joke. Chill. Okay. It was pretty strange, though, because we'd been playing in some daft dance hall in the middle of nowhere, and it would be packed, but we played all those gigs. Everyone's saying they're exhausted. Look at the cover. Listen to the music. Baby's in black. I'm a loser. John is angry. Paul is bitter. And sure, the Beatles are accustomed to these quick turnarounds. They do this. They're used to pumping out singles, albums, and this is a cycle that the Beatles will not break for a while. So it's not so much that they're exhausted. I mean, this isn't Hamburg. There's a couple words out there I will never be able to pronounce properly because of reasons.
Hamburg.
That's what 5 years of German get you. You can't do it correctly anymore. So it's not so much that they're exhausted. Rather, their standards have risen. These guys are writing their own music, they're making their own music, and what we'll see is that they're starting to have more of a voice in the studio. They care more about what they're putting forth to the public, but also what they're putting out for themselves. So those 8 songs may have meant more to them, and in general, people like those 8 songs.
I've just liked this kind of music for about 8 years, or since it came out. It's just good, good fun.
But back to the it had been 7 months since a release thing, or the it would be 7 months when Beatles for Sale was released. It was highly anticipated, and there was a lot of pressure. They were probably feeling it. Author Nicholas Schaefer breaks it down here. 16 45s of the Beatles had been issued in rapid succession over the first 7 months of the year, making the ensuing gap seem like forever. All Beatlemaniacs were kept glued to their transistors during the agonizing 10 days between the song's first appearance on the airwaves. Jack, dude. Between the song's first appearance on the airwaves and their arrival in the shops, a ritual that would be reenacted every time the Fabs came out with another record, and one that in the Beatles' more cosmic incarnations came to resemble that of discipline awaiting the latest word. The DJs quickly caught on to this fanaticism and would keep us on edge, tuned into their station with hints that the new songs might be aired any minute. Brian knew, however, that they couldn't do everything. Even when he's trying to keep their schedule packed, he had to draw the line somewhere. Basically, nights off were so scarce that he refused to appear at the Royal Command performance for the Queen, which pissed off Bernard Delfont. And as Brian's assistant, Peter Brown, tells it in his book, which was co-authored by Stephen Gaines, there was some funny pushback. He wrote to Brian in September of 1964, begging him to reconsider his decision and reminding him how thrilled he was to have been asked the first time. When this drew no positive response from Brian, Delfont wrote again, threatening to announce to the press that the Queen had already extended an invitation to the Beatles in an effort to embarrass them into accepting. But Brian held strong. He replied to Delfont that he didn't see any advantage to the boys in repeating themselves, no matter how exalted the event. Boundaries. A painful lapse in professionalism, indeed. So busy, wearied, tapped out, played out, fatigued, bushed, burnt out, limp, worn to a frazzle, that they couldn't play for the Queen. I really should mention, before we get into the actual album bits of this, that Brian does not turn down business opportunities.
You find we hardly ever had a day off, and we'd have to complain to Brian. He'd have all the pressure of people saying, yeah, we want to book the Beatles, I gotta have them, making him offers he couldn't refuse. So we were having to say, we've gotta have a day off, man.
When it comes to their time in studio and the resulting product, George Martin, like I said, the producer, does call this a lapse in the Beatles' music. He remembered Beatles for Sale as a dip in energy. From Mark Hertsgaard's A Day in the Life. They were rather war-weary during Beatles for Sale. One must remember that they'd been battered like mad throughout 1964 and much of 1963. Success is a wonderful thing, but it is very, very tiring. They were always on the go. Beatles for Sale doesn't appeal to me very much now. It's not one of their most memorable ones. They perked up again after that. And then the author goes on to observe something that, while it's been overstated, I think I should add here because it is just so fitting. War-weary is an apt phrase. The cover photos for Beatles for Sale made the Beatles look almost shell-shocked. The Beatles still had their mop-top haircuts, but their carefree image had cracked. But when Ringo looked back on this time, Anthology, so still 1990s, he viewed it positively and productively. I felt we were progressing in leaps and bounds musically. Some of the material on Beatles for Sale and the 1965 Rubber Soul album, why did he say it like that, was just brilliant. What was happening elsewhere was nothing like it. It was getting to be really exciting in the studio. We did it all in there, rehearsing, recording, and finishing songs. We never hired a rehearsal room to run down the songs because a lot of them weren't finished. The ideas were there for the first verse or a chorus, but it could be changed by the writers as we were doing it, or if anyone had a good idea.
I mean, the bottom line for me is that we were a great little band. If I would just sort of go, well, one for the money, like, bam, everyone just being like, bang. We just knew each other that well, you know.
George said something similar as well. This is also from Anthology. He said, our records were progressing. We'd started out like anyone spending their first time in a studio, nervous and naive and looking for success. By this time, we'd had loads of hits and a few tours, and we were becoming more relaxed with ourselves and more comfortable in the studio, and the music was getting better. For this album, we rehearsed only the new ones. Songs like Honey Don't and Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, we'd played live so often that we only had to get a sound on them and do them. But with songs like Babies in Black, we had to learn and rehearse them. We were beginning to do a little overdubbing too, probably a 4-track, and George Martin would suggest some changes, not too many, but he was always an integral part of it. Inspiration from this album came from R&B, rhythm and blues, old rock and roll. And during this time, there were so many interviews. I went through a database, but once again, it's a different video. While they were traveling North America, reporters would ask them what kind of music they liked. And I remember a couple times where Ringo was talking, we like black groups, we like black music. That's a huge inspiration for us. And we see that in Beatles for Sale a lot. But as they toured, the days and nights traveling the world, the sprawling USA sparked a low burning fire in the Beatles' belly. Some good old-fashioned country. And this, of course, was conveniently gaining popularity with their American folk singer contemporary Bob Dylan. In a 2023 album review for Far Out magazine, Tim Kaufman notes the influence throughout the album. Outside of the traditional Beatle whimsy, the band were paying close attention to what was going on outside of the UK rock scene. The harmonica on I'm a Loser is a nod to Bob Dylan's brand of folk rock, and George Harrison's guitar lick in What You're Doing is a melodic flourish in tune with the Byrds' flavor of rock and roll. An aside, the Beatles met Bob Dylan. I'm only touching on this because the Beatles and Bob Dylan, truly different video. And then George Harrison and Bob Dylan, different video. And then the Traveling Wilburys, different video. And how could we forget the most uncomfortable car ride of all time, which is not a different video, it's just funny. The Beatles were introduced to Bob Dylan by Al Aronowitz on August 28th, 1964 at the New York's Delmonico Hotel.
We had a crazy party the night we met. I thought I got the meaning to life that night. The next morning he said, hey Paul, he said, do you want to see that? I said, what? He said, that bit of paper. Oh yeah. And I'd written, there are 7 levels.
And during this fateful meeting, Bob Dylan introduced the Beatles to weed. I'm so tired of the story. He mistakenly believed that I Can't Hide and I Want to Hold Your Hand was I Get High. So this is one of the most overtold moments in Beatle history. It's not germane to this conversation really at all. And yet will certainly be brought up in my comment section, so here I am mentioning it. Let's let the boys take it away. This is from Anthology. Paul said, one thing he did introduce us to was pot. I mean, we'd heard all the jokes that Ray Charles' band had been at the Hammersmith Odeon, and the cleaner said, he must be really tight, that Ray Charles. There are 2 of his musicians sharing a ciggy in the toilet, and we thought it was funny, but it wasn't us. Then Bob came around to our hotel and he said to us, here, try a bit of this. It is very indiscreet to say this because I don't know whether Bob is telling people he turned the Beatles on to marijuana, but it was funny. John said, we smoked and laughed all night and he kept answering our phone saying, this is Beatlemania here. It was ridiculous.
But is that true?
No, it is true, but he didn't actually give us it. He was in the room.
So he was not the supplier?
No. Yeah. Bob Dylan's your dealer.
Paul said, he was our idol, so we were into him as a poet, and we all had his first album with his floppy cap. I'm sure that's where the linen cap came from. John was a particularly big admirer. John said, when I met Dylan, I was quite dumbfounded. I'm pretty much a fan type myself, in a way. I stopped being a fan when I started doing it myself. I never went collecting people's autographs or any of that jive, but if I dig somebody, I really dig them.
He was our idol.
Bob was our hero.
Not an idol, but we...
And Paul said, vocally and poetically, Dylan was a huge influence. Lyrically, he is still one of the best. Some of the long, rambling poems he set to music are still some of my favorite pieces of work. But of course, Paul and Anthology wanted to make sure that we knew about John's poetry as well. He said, I'm sure that the main influence on both Dylan and John was Dylan Thomas. That's why Bob's not Bob Zimmerman, his real name. We all used to like Dylan Thomas. I read him a lot. I think that John started writing because of him, and the fact that Bob Dylan wrote poetry added to his appeal. John was already doing it in his own right. He was writing before he'd heard of Bob Dylan.
John was a baby. A lovely little baby, John was.
Now, Bob Dylan definitely did have influence on this album, but I would argue that the influence is really noticeable in Rubber Soul. That being said, I'm not nearly as familiar with Bob Dylan music as I am with... I'm not familiar with Bob Dylan music, period. Really, I only know a couple songs. You know, actually, I'm not familiar with almost anything other than the Beatles and Lost. You shouldn't ask me about anything. So we gotta talk about the singles. Okay, so listen, there's lipstick on my teeth for like a portion of this video that goes on for a minute. And while I could have refilmed that, no. It starts with a single note. A pluck of the A on Paul's bass, and the feedback from John's guitar leaning up against the amp. The first use of feedback on a rock record. This was really well explained by Nicholas Schaffner. He said, this single, like so many to come, had its share of surprises. I Feel Fine kicked off to a strange, searing noise that many of us mistook for a mosquito until it was revealed to be electric guitar feedback, an innovation that was later amplified by The Who, Jefferson Airplane, and Jimi Hendrix to become a staple of acid rock. The song, which featured hazily mixed harmonies hovering over an insistent guitar riff that faded out to the sound of barking dogs, was their most innovative and mesmerizing recording yet. She's a Woman, a mighty chunk of rock and roll, had Paul belting away in his show-stopping long tall Sally voice for the first time in an original composition. From John's 1980 Playboy interview, they were tossing out song names and he was just reacting to them. So Playboy says, I Feel Fine, and John says, that's me, including the guitar lick with the first feedback ever recorded. I defy anyone to find an earlier record unless it is some old blues record from the 20s with feedback on it. John played it on an acoustic electric guitar, which was a Gibson J160E.
The A string started feeding back at him. What? Can you do that? You know, he said, George, what else I do? Let it on the front or something.
George Martin was there, so we said, can we have that on the record? And he said, well, I suppose we could. We could edit it on the front. We could edit it on the front.
He found it quite difficult to get the right amount of feedback, you know. And I think it was the first time, was it not, that feedback was used on a record? He loved things like that. He loved weird kind of effects, and it was his idea. It was great.
John said, I wrote I Feel Fine around that riff going on in the background. I tried to get that effect into practically every song on the LP, but the others wouldn't have it. I told them I'd write a song specifically for the riff. So they said, yes, you go away and do that, knowing that we'd almost finished the album. Anyway, going into the studio one morning, I said to Ringo, I've written this song, but it's lousy. And we tried it, complete with a riff, and it sounded like an A-side, so we decided just to release it like that. George and I play the same bit on guitar together, and that's the bit that'll set your feet a-tappin', as the reviews say. I suppose it has a bit of country and western feel about it, but then so have a lot of our songs. The middle 8 is the most tuneful part to me because it's a typical Beatles bit. Now the riff was influenced by Watch Your Step by Bobby Parker. John said, Watch Your Step is one of my favorite records. The Beatles have used the lick in various forms. The Allman Brothers used the lick straight as it was. As for the B-side, woo! This is from Paul McCartney's The Lyrics. We all liked a certain kind of R&B. These days, R&B is sort of hip-hop, but back then it was proper rhythm and blues. And early on, we all loved black music. We loved the spontaneity or seeming spontaneity of it. The songs we listened to often refer to a woman. A song like I Got a Woman by Ray Charles, or Little Richard's hymns to Long Tall Sally and Good Golly, Miss Lolly. Miss Molly. A lot of what we were listening to was already there, but I think what we did was to take it in, send it through the tumble dryer, distill it, and push it out on the other end. She's a Woman extols the virtue of a girl of mine, and let's be clear, she's not a girl, she's a woman. Because this was the interesting thing. When does a girl become a woman? To us, they'd been girls till we were around 21, and they were still sort of girls, but now we could dare think of ourselves as men, and we could think of girls as women. Often one of us would come up with something that put a spark in the recording. I think the spark on the recording of She's a Woman was the combination of John's backbeat guitar and my bass. I've never composed on the bass, never, not to this day. So how did I end up playing the bass in this band? Well, after my cheap Rossetti solid 7 guitar fell apart in Hamburg, I had to find a new instrument. We already had 2 guitars, a drummer, and Stuart Sutcliffe, the bass player. There happened to be a piano on the stage where we played, so I took that and just sort of worked all the songs out on piano. So I became the pianist in the group. What was quite funny was that Stuart didn't have any spare bass strings, so if one of the bass strings broke, he would raid my piano. He'd take a pair of pliers and cut out a string. When we were in Hamburg, I got it. Stuart fell in love with a local girl called Astrid and decided he was leaving the group, so we were now without a bass player. We couldn't have 3 guitars and no bass. Nobody wanted to be the bass player in those days because it was always the fat guy playing bass. There seemed to be some sort of stigma attached to it. I wonder why, Paul. Anyway, I bought a Hofner bass, a lovely violin-shaped thing that appealed to me because, being left-handed, I knew I was going to turn it upside down. Its symmetry was a big attraction for me, and it was light as a feather. I have to smile at the fact that I turned out to be a bass player because my dad always used to point out the bass in songs we heard. He was a musician with Jim Mack's jazz band, playing piano and trumpet, and he educated me and my brother in music appreciation. We'd be listening to something on the radio and he'd say, "Hear that? That's the bass." Before we take a listen to the singles, let's run down the single facts real quick. I Feel Fine was released as a single with She's a Woman as a B-side on November 23rd, 1964. Written by Lennon McCartney and produced by George Martin. I Feel Fine topped the US Billboard Hot 100 chart for 3 weeks, and She's a Woman peaked at number 4. It was the Beatles' 6th single to top the American charts in a calendar year, which was an all-time record, and I think that they went up to 7 to hit that record. Let's do a little swap comparison right here, just for fun, The percussion goes so hard on this. Let's see what we got. This is good. This is one where it's kind of hard to separate it because everything is very cohesive. When you're listening to music and you separate the instruments to listen to them in your brain, or at least that's what I do. This one's kind of hard to separate the different instruments in my brain because it's very cohesive. At least the 2023 mixes, I feel like it has been for the most part because the song itself is very cohesive. Sorry. So it's hard to almost, I'm trying to listen to the bass right now. If the percussion is not the unsung hero, it is certainly the sung hero here. I really dig the percussion in this song. It is so good. It's so jolly. Baby says she's mine, she tells me all the time. John's voice sounds really, really, really good there. Bum 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 ba da 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 da. Additionally, the Beatles recorded a song called Leave My Kitten Alone, which was unreleased until Anthology came out. This was originally in the script and then somehow didn't make it in, and now this is just a footnote, so this is all I'm gonna be able to give you on this, and yeah, that's it, sorry.
I'd just like to say how honoured I am to be chosen as the one to open this very Lucky Star special. Without more ado, I open it do open. Oh, get out!
Despite the Beatles being the Beatles, there's still promotion, preparation, all kinds of stuff that comes with making an album and putting out singles. Tony Barrow, who we talked about before, said, personal visits by the Fab Four to television studios for live broadcasts were becoming problematic to program producers because the crowds of fans disrupted the making of other shows in the same building. Yeah, I bet. I bet it was crazy. Jeez. The answer was to pre-record the group's spots at unexpected times and at unpublicized places at short notice so that the news of our plans had no time to travel along the fans' extremely efficient grapevine. This is ripped directly from Wikipedia, but it's so concise, y'all, that I'm just gonna read it, okay? Try not to do this, but 4th November, 4 days after completing their UK tour, the Beatles mimed performances of I'm a Loser and Rock and Roll Music, and both sides of the I Feel Fine single for broadcast on a special edition of the TV show Thank Your Lucky Stars. And there was promotion with the BBC Light program session where the Beatles played live versions of I'm a Loser, Honey Don't, Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, and I'll Fall the Sun. They also had an appearance on Ready Steady Go where they mimed performances of Babies in Black in Kansas City, which, okay, listen, I'm not going to do the hey, 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 hey every time. It's not happening. I'm just going to call it Kansas City. And the group included I'm a Loser, Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, Babies in Black, Honey Don't, and Rock and Roll Music in another Beatles Christmas show presentation held at London's Hammersmith Odeon from 24th December to 16th January 1965. And I will tell you, I don't talk about that at all. That is probably also another video. So I don't talk about that at all. I think this is my only mention of it. Apologies. Let's talk briefly about the cover. The album art was taken in Hyde Park by Robert Friedman, and the goal was to do a color photo outdoors toward the sunset. It was very minimalist, but it came out in a gatefold sleeve, which was a rare design feature. I think something that's also very intriguing is the Beatles for Sale sleeve notes by Derek Taylor, which was the Beatles press officer. So I'm just going to read those. This is the 4th by the 4. Please please me with the Beatles, Hard Day's Night. That's 3. Now, Beatles for sale. The young men themselves aren't for sale. Money, noisy though it is, doesn't talk that loud. But you can buy this album. You probably have, unless you're just browsing. In which case, don't leave any dirty thumbprints on the sleeve. Please. It isn't all currency or current, though. There's priceless history between these covers. None of us is getting any younger when, in a generation or so, a radioactive cigar-smoking child picnicking on Saturn asks you what the Beatle affair was all about. Did you actually know them? Don't try to explain all about the long hair and the screams. Just play the child a few tracks from this album and he'll probably understand what it was all about. The kids of AD 2000 will draw from the music much the same sense of well-being and warmth as we do today. And that is true. Okay, but he's not done. Okay. For the magic of the Beatles is, I suspect, timeless and ageless. It has broken all frontiers and barriers. It has cut through differences of race, age, and class. It is adored by the world. This album has some lovely samples of Beatle music. It has, for instance, 8 new titles wrought by the incomparable John Lennon and Paul McCartney. And mingling with the new, there are 6 numbers culled from the rhythmic wealth of the past extraordinary decade, pieces like Kansas City and Rock and Roll Music. Marvelous. Many hours and hard days, nights of the devoted industry went into the production of this album. It isn't a pot-boiling, quick sale, any old thing will do for Christmas mixture. At least 3 of the Lennon-McCartney songs were seriously considered as single releases until John popped up with I Feel Fine. These 3 were 8 Days a Week, No Reply, and I'm a Loser. Each would have topped the charts, but as it is, they are an adornment to this LP and a lesson to the other artist. As on other albums, the Beatles have tossed in far more value than the market usually demands. There are a few gimmicks or recording tricks, though for effect, the Beatles and the recording producer George Martin have slipped in some novelties, like Paul on Hammond organ to introduce drama into Mr. Moonlight, which also, and for the first time, has George Harrison applying a thump to an elderly African drum because Ringo was busy elsewhere in the studio playing bongos. George's thump remains on the track. The bongos were later dropped. Ringo plays timpani in every little thing, and on the Rock and Roll Music track, George joins John and Paul on one piano. On A Words of Love, Ringo plays a packing case. Beyond this, it is straightforward 1964 disc making, quite the best of its kind in the world. There is little or nothing on the album which cannot be reproduced on stage. As students and critics of pop music know, is not always the case. Here it is then, the best album yet, definitively, says John, Paul, George, and Ringo, full of everything which made the 4 the biggest attraction the world has ever known. Full of raw John and melodic Paul, a number from George and a bonus from Ringo. For those who like to know who does precisely what, there are details alongside each title. Derek Taylor. Let's break down the stats. Beatles for Sale is the 4th studio album by the Beatles. It was recorded August 11th to October 26, 1964, with mixing extending to November 4th. The album was released on December 4th, 1964 in the UK on Parlophone. It held number 1 in the UK charts for 11 of the 46 weeks it was in the top 20, and similarly successful in Australia. Second, the CD re-release was on 26 February 1987 and remastered and released again on 9th September 2009. Let's break down the charts a little bit more. Beatles for Sale took number 1, knocking A Hard Day's Night off the top spot. It was the number 1 in UK and Germany, number 5 in Australia, but it was a weird trajectory. Rolling Stones topped Beatles for Sale, but Beatles for Sale comes back on 26 February for 1 week, and then Rolling Stones number 2 took over again until Beatles for Sale comes back on May 1st for another 3 weeks, then Dylan took over. 8 of the album's tracks were later released on 2 4-song EPs, Beatles for Sale released in April and Beatles for Sale number 2 released in June. In the UK, Beatles for Sale was the best-selling album in 1964 and the second best in 1965. Quick aside, Beatles for Sale was not widely available in the US until the CD release in 1987. As a substitute of sorts, 8 of the tracks were on the 15th December 1964 US release, Beatles 65, and that wasn't released on CD until 2004. The more you know. Here's the songs it omitted. Kansas City, 8 Days a Week, which was a number 1 hit single in the US in early 1965. What You're Doing, Words of Love, Every Little Thing, and I Don't Want to Spoil the Party, but it added I'll Be Back, I Feel Fine, and She's a Woman. The numbers were great. I would really like to dig into some of the reviews that I went through. They're interesting. They're not that repetitive, but maybe a little. So in the Rolling Stone review, it's into this book. In this big page, there's this tiny paragraph. Zoom in a little bit more. Okay, there we go. And this is what it says. The strain of Beatlemania shows in Beatles for Sale as the lads unload some of the ickiest covers from their bar band days. But they keep growing with What You're Doing and I'm a Loser. The harmonies of Babies in Black, the hair-raising I Still Love Her climax of I Don't Want to Spoil the Party, the eager hand claps in 8 Days a Week, it all makes Mr. Moonlight easy to forgive. This is from Far Out Magazine review by Tim Kaufman. I mentioned it before. Outside of a few bells and whistles, the Beatles had been run ragged over a few years leading up to this record, and it shows. While the band are their usual charismatic selves throughout, the cover says it all for the record, looking straight into the lens, borderline emotionless. But he says that it's far from doom and gloom all over. As much as Lennon can sell a good love song, a song about there not being enough days in a week to love his girlfriend is ripped straight out of McCartney's song library. He also mentioned Bob Dylan's influence, which I went over before. He says that Kansas City backfires a touch and the album does a good job of showcasing each member's talents. But he says that Beatles for Sale is an indication of where the Beatles were spinning their wheels a little bit. And Pitchfork Magazine's 2009 review of Beatles for Sale by Tom Ewing says that the album is the angriest, most aggressive record in the Beatles catalog. It's a really good mess. And he writes, blame pot or the inspiration of Bob Dylan or just the pressure cooker environment the group was in, but the record hits a seam of angry creativity. And I have to be honest, I don't agree with everything in this review, and I'll go through it as we listen here in a bit, but I'm going to read a big chunk of this because I really liked it. It rather sums up how I feel. This is particularly true of Lennon's amazing first 3 songs. No Reply shatters itself with waves of jealous rage, taking the menace that had flecked the Beatles' music and bringing it up in the mix. His dangerously quiet That's a Lie is the most chilling moment in their catalog. I'm a Loser turns that anger inward with just as much brutality, and Babies in Black curdles a nursery rhyme, transforms the group's crisp pop sound into an off-kilter clang, and uses John and Paul McCartney's double vocals to thicken the soupy sound even further. This run of tracks marries the direct attack of their earliest material and the boundary pushing of their later albums and stands with the best of the both. Even so, it's a relief when rock and roll music breaks the tension. Yeah. Especially when you notice that the band are playing their best rock and roll since Twist and Shout. Perhaps the work rate had pushed them back into the Hamburg hot zone. Did it again! I got it! Okay. The up-tempo covers on Beatles for Sale are fiercely good, as ragged, loud, and immediate as the songs needed to be. Even Mr. Moonlight fits the aggressive mood, the ugliness of its organ solo, surely deliberate. Editing Lars here, just wanted you to remember that. Remember that! McCartney's songs on Beatles for Sale are more thoughtful than moody, though on his splendid Every Little Thing, given melodic thrust Shangri-La style piano and bass drum, he's distinctly melancholy. His "Yes, I know I'm a lucky guy" sounding like an attempt to convince himself of that. But Lennon's anger and the band's rediscovery of rock and roll mean for Sale's reputation as the group's meanest album is deserved, even if it has 8 days a week as its breezy centerpiece, which is so funny for the Lars Land lore. We'll get there. The lumpiest and least welcoming of their early records, it's also one of the most rewarding. Couldn't say it better myself. But that's not everyone's thought process, which is why we read several. So this is Stephen Thomas Erlewine's All Music Review. It was inevitable that the constant grind of touring, writing, promoting, and recording would grate on the Beatles, but the weariness of Beatles for Sale comes as something of a shock. Only 5 months before, the group released a joyous A Hard Day's Night. Now they sound beaten, worn, and in Lennon's case, bitter and self-loathing. And David Quantrick's BBC Music Review says, several of these songs, such as the Mad Waltz, that is Babies in Black, bear loud witness to the fact that the Beatles were spending an awful lot of time traveling around the United States, listening to country stations. And thank goodness, as a Beatles album inspired by mid-60s British radio would have been an awful thing. Some songs here are covers. The band simply didn't have time to write enough original material, but surprisingly, instead of being a limp filler, oldies like Kansas City and Mr. Moonlight are roaringly strong. In fact, the most notable track here, apart from the USA-only single 8 Days a Week, is Lennon's brilliant throat-ripping version of Chuck Berry's rock and roll music, while Ringo's comparable love for Carl Perkins makes his cover of Honey Don't a complete delight. Beatles for Sale is a transitional album, the group learning their way around the studio and becoming more sophisticated. Rubber Soul would see them make another great leap forward and drop the covers again, but this is a joyous, inventive, and exciting album, especially considering the circumstances it was made in. So that's what the reviews say. In general, I hear more criticism from the fans than I do from the critics. And perhaps that's just regarding the knowledge of covers and just thinking about things in more of a neutral way, like I did earlier, even though I was angry, but like a more, you know, it's fine, whatever. I'm going to take a break and then we're going to listen.
The entertainment phenomenon of the century. The Beatles!
It's obviously later, right? Now we're listening to music. It's the next day. I needed to chill. You needed a break from me emotionally. We understand this. It's a symbiotic relationship. I am anticipating audio issues. This is my first time using this mic. I've already made a few mistakes on my end before I've even gotten into editing it. I will learn. I will get better. As a reminder, anything more than about 3 to 7 seconds of copyrighted music will lead to a copyright claim, and in my experience, block my videos from being seen by anyone, anywhere. If I don't follow by these rules, my videos do not exist. I understand how frustrating it is to not be able to listen to music on a Beatles channel. I don't make the rules, I just have to abide by them. All right, so let's get on to No Reply. In Peter Asher's book, he says, John wrote it for Tommy Quickly, which was a client of Brian Epstein, and the Beatles cut a demo from it, which Tommy learned the song. Tommy did record it, but apparently nobody was very happy with his rendition, and it was not released. But the Beatles demo was released on Anthology. What is interesting about this version is that apparently it is not Ringo playing drums because he was ill with tonsillitis.
Take 2.
This is No Reply Anthology 1 version.
This happened once before, and I came to your door.
Many people think that the drummer was Jimmy Nicol because the Beatles had been rehearsing with him earlier that day for the Australian tour that Ringo could not do because of his illness. As I said, I'm not necessarily an expert on all of these historical details, but my understanding is that Jimmy, who did go to Australia with the Beatles, indeed as a Beatle, was there rehearsing at EMI, so it seems most likely that he is playing on it. And of course, the real version was recorded by the Beatles in the fall of 1964 and came out in Beatles for Sale in the... Okay. John later said that he had been inspired to write No Reply by the record Silhouettes by the Rays, which was an R&B quartet from New York. Let me pull that up real quick.
Come within the dim light cast, 2 silhouettes on the shade.
John was taken with the image of knowing that someone was home and thus knowing that their failure to answer the door or the phone was deliberate and deceptive. Took a walk and passed your house late last night. All the shades were pulled and drawn way down tight. From within, the dim light cast two silhouettes on the shade. Oh, what a lovely couple they made. Lost control and rang your bell, I was sore. Let me in or else I'll beat down your door. When two strangers who have been two silhouettes on the shade said to my shock, you're on the wrong block. John said, no reply was my song. Dick James, the publisher, said, that's the first complete song you've written where it resolves itself, you know, with a complete story. It was my version of Silhouettes. I had that image of walking down the street and seeing her silhouetted in the window and not answering the phone. Although I never called a girl on the phone in my life, phones weren't part of the English child's life. Returning again to Tim Kaufman's review, he is by no means, by the way, like an expert. I just think his review is indicative of what I saw from other reviews, and it's written well, so I think that because he kind of seems to speak for the public, it's why I use his quotes several times rather than mine personally, which I read earlier. This, I feel like, is the fairest way to do that. I don't know. Sorry, am I taking this too seriously? I'm always taking it too seriously. Anyway, he says, at the helm, as always, is John Lennon, kicking off the record with the mid-tempo song No Reply, which has a far more bitter tone than the Fab's traditional I love you sort of songs. As opposed to Guy Gets Girl Love Song, Lennon has a lot more insecurity on show, given that his lady friend doesn't answer any of his calls and doesn't take him back. Let's start with No Reply. Let's start at the very beginning. So I want you to imagine, and many of you can remember, when you first got Beatles for Sale and put it on. It's silence, you're anticipating the fourth from the four, right?
This happened once before, I came to your door.
Coincidentally, 7 seconds. I think I can play that. There's these guitar trills underneath that are kind of tropical almost.
They said it wasn't you, but I saw you peep through.
Very chill, very fun. And then
I saw the light.
And back down. What? Where did that come from? It's just sudden, and we have to just take a second to listen to this harmony.
I saw the light.
I mentioned this in every single one of my videos, that John and Paul's harmony is the most unique thing I've ever heard in my life. I just find it so incredibly moving. I'm obviously not the only one who thinks that.
That's a lie.
And I like that because that's sassy too. I tried to call and they said that you weren't here, and that is a lie, bitch. I know that you're not telling the truth.
I nearly died.
Here comes one of the most powerful bars, vocals, in my opinion, from John of all time. I don't know why. It has always stuck with me. I attribute Beatles for Sale to the longevity of my interest in the Beatles. I'm not kidding. I think that it really cemented my love for the Beatles in the summer of 2022. And this line right here.
If I were you, I'd realize that.
If I were you. It's just if I were you, I'd know. And somebody in one of my comments, this sticks with me, says that I was like agreeing with promoting John's aggressiveness. That's a different video, guys, okay? By backing that line. Have you not been in a relationship with someone who it's like, if I were you, I'd realize that I love you more than that guy. I love you more than any other guy. Have you not ever had this angsty, late teen, angry relationships where you feel jealous and frustrated and insecure? You can't feel that? You can't express that in a song without being too angry, without being too aggressive. It's too much. Where can you express your anger then? Oh, did I just spit bars? I absolutely just spat bars. Am I gonna go this hard on every song? Probably not. I'm pretty sure that John was not singing toward anyone specific. I think that in a lot of these earlier albums especially, they're not talking about anyone specific. That being said, whatever he's singing from, whatever experience he's singing from, it's real. in a lot of instances, in almost every instance, John is the one who supplies the grit and Paul is the one who supplies the bubblegum pop. In this situation, actually insecure and upset. So this time, actually, Paul's high vocals, high ragged harmony is the grit. It's very interesting. You hear it? Gritty. The silhouette in the window. I saw you walk in. I nearly died. So heartbreaking. I see you with this man and they're lying for you. I feel like almost everyone has been cheated on. It's almost a universal experience. And surely if you haven't been cheated on, you know someone who has and it's ripped you apart. And that feeling of finding out, I nearly died, man. 'Cause you walk hand in hand with another man. Left on red. I'm a loser. I'm a Loser is me in my Dylan period because the word clown is in it. I objected to the word clown because that was always artsy fartsy, but Dylan had used it, so I thought it was all right, and it rhymed with whatever I was doing. Back to that Playboy interview. Playboy asks, was I'm a loser a similarly personal statement? And he says, part of me suspects I'm a loser, and the other part of me thinks I'm God Almighty. Once again, here's Far Out Magazine's Tim Kaufman. By the way, his rate of the album was 3.5 out of 5 stars. The cynical streak continues on I'm a Loser, which sees Lennon at the lowest he had ever been up until this point, groaning about a love that had gone sour. Instead of talking about how bitter he's feeling, Lennon is content to lay into himself on this album, like the conflicted feelings that he has with charming a recently widowed woman on Babies in Black. I'm a loser. So John's having a tough go. He says, I'm a loser. And I'm not what I appear to be. And I'm not what I appear to be. And it's like, you're John Lennon. You're the coolest guy in the world. Nope. I suck. I should never have crossed. When you hear that never have crossed, do you think that John felt insecure about that? John was very insecure about his voice. He drops pretty low there. I don't know the notes, obviously. I wonder if that was a challenge for him because I notice it. And every time I think about things that may have been challenging vocally, I wonder how much John like tooled over it in his head. Just normal, rational things. I'm a loser. Bass line. Bass line. There's nothing like it. Rain from the sky. I really appreciate those little guitar trills at the end of these lines, punctuating the sentences. That is so George. He's just there, like just a little bit, just a little. In the harmonica bits, John has played the harmonica in many of his songs. I believe he had the mouth organ before he had anything else. This wasn't just from Dylan, obviously, but of course it is trendy and it is cool, and I think that it perfectly fits the song. This is really that rhythm. This is really that rhythm and blues bit, the real rhythm and blues thing that they are talking about. This is where we're seeing that influence, the derivatives from the rhythm and blues going on. This is where we're seeing how the Beatles were adapting that. I'm telling you. I really love those punctuatory trills. Babies in Black. Oh dear, what can I do? Babies in Black we did because we liked waltz time. We used to do If You Gotta Make a Fool Out of Somebody, a cool 3/4 blues thing. If you gotta make a fool of somebody. Damn. Anyway. Paul said, and other bands would notice that and say, shit, man, you're doing something in 3/4. So we'd got known for that. And I think also John and I wanted to do something bluesy, a bit darker, more grown up, rather than just straight pop. It was more Babies in Black, as in mourning. Our favorite color was black as well. I've seen some speculation that Babies in Black is about Astrid Kircher. She was the partner of Stuart Sutcliffe, who died a tragically young death. I have only seen speculation about that. I even looked at Beatles Bible, which I don't usually do. I have a thing about it. Anyway, I do use Wikipedia. It's just that I find that my sourcing, I go deeper to sourcing. So if I'm relying on one Beatles database of information, I'm always going to lose things because someone else is going to think something else is important, whereas I will find something else important. This is my Wikipedia thing. I check Wikipedia because it's all right there. I spend most of my Wikipedia time in the release, critical reception, track listing, personnel charts. All of the numbers, that's where I spend my time in Wikipedia because that's usually the hardest, especially the reviews. And I go through a lot of databases on my own. I own a lot of Beatles books, and I find that I would just rather do it myself. In some cases, convenience pays off. When you're trying to be a deep dive researcher on the Beatles, convenience does not pay off. So Beatles Bible is a great resource. I do not use it, but I did check it because I thought, well, if there's something about Astrid Kircher, you know, this might not be on the Babies in Black Wikipedia page, but it might be on Beatles Bible. And it said that there was speculation, but I haven't seen anything to back that up. It could be about anything, but sure, it would work. The timing would be a little weird because it's been about 3 years. When did Stuart Sutcliffe die? April 10th, 1962, so 3 years.
Oh dear, what can I do?
This song is iconic. The harmony goes in a way that there are 3 songs just from their voices. There's Paul, John, and them together. And so you can listen to the song in 3 different ways, plus a bunch of other combinations, but it's just right there, already packaged together in such a lovely way.
So she dresses in black.
The percussion is great here. It's not overstated, but it is so consistent throughout the song.
And though he'll never come back, she's dressed in black.
This song, when I'm listening to it, I think it has less to do with the lyrics, the way that they're singing it, the way that I listen to the song, interpret it. The Beatles were really into this as a song. I think that this is a really fun song because I almost get that vibe when I listen to it, that they were really enjoying making it. That probably doesn't make sense to anyone else.
Oh, how long will it take?
It almost sounds auto-tuned, how good that is right there, but it's not. And of course, you gotta remember the little dance move that they do together. I love this song so much.
And so she dresses in black, and though she'll never come back.
That is such an interesting Paul voice here. It almost sounds babyish.
Just let me hear some of the rock and roll music.
I love this song. I don't have any extra notes about it. It has been mentioned in a couple places here and there. It's played in Get Back, which I really love, and it is just really fun to know that there's some stuff from these times that the Beatles still like playing, you know? The first of the dreaded covers.
Just let me hear some of the rock and roll music.
So strong, so awesome. Let's listen to Chuck Berry's version for a sec.
Just let me hear some of that rock and roll music.
Obviously, so the comparison is not, it's not there in as far as production. I'm sure y'all love Chuck Berry, and so do I.
I have no kick against Marty.
To me, it's not comparable. I much prefer the Beatles version.
Just let me hear some of that rock and roll music.
Sorry. I would love to quickly drop over into the Get Back version of rock and roll music, which I think I already have. So we'll just clip it in right here. I love knowing that they loved this song later on always. And they always do love these classics that they refer to, these inspirations that were really pillars of their musical style. But man, look at the way that they took it and went with it. Their version, of course, on Beatles for Sale. Delicious. I love this song. I know that I think I've stopped and said that. Whoa, it's fun. It's so fun, and I'm trying to pause so I can put in more in the YouTube version. We can talk about the piano. Listen to this. This is George Martin.
Way down south they had a jubilee.
Way down south they had a jubilee.
They go to folks they had a
Jamboree. Fun fact, there were no overdubs on this recording. This is a live, marvelous live performance. I think I said this about Bangladesh, the single. It was like there are 7 people on there, but it sounds like 1,000. Not that I'm like quotable or anything. I just remember feeling that way. And that's kind of how I feel about this one. It doesn't sound like 1 piano. It sounds like 3. In some ways, the guitar melds together, and the intersection of all of these instruments with John's voice, it's very good. And it is just a great production. It's a great remaster as well. I should probably mention that. Listening to the 2009 remasters, obviously.
Get to hear them play a tango.
Don't care to hear them play tango. Don't care for it. Oh, it's so fun though. That piano. Not just to talk about George Martin. I'm just saying, like, it all works so well together. And this is from Paul McCartney's The Lyrics. He said, "The last house I lived in Liverpool was 20 Forthland Road. By then we'd moved up in the world. My mum had great aspirations for us, and she'd found this house in a comparatively nice area. There were lace curtains, which is probably why I've still got lace curtains everywhere. An Irish thing, maybe, so people can't look in. I remember standing in the living room with my guitar, singing this song. When you think about it, it's a leaving of Liverpool song. I'm leaving this rainy northern town for some place where more is happening. It's an interesting melody too. I'd been searching for striking new combinations of notes. There's something quite original about it. One of my favorite songs of my dad's era was Cheek to Cheek, the Fred Astaire song, and what I liked about it was that it starts with Heaven, I'm in heaven. And it goes through 2 verses and comes back at the end of the middle 8 to heaven. It's a single sentence. It was like our house in Forthland Road. You went in through the front door, went around the living room, dining room, kitchen, hall, and ended up back where you started. All Follow the Sun does that too. Even if we were open to influences, I'm assuming, one of the great things about the Beatles was our aversion to repeating ourselves. We were intelligent young lads. We didn't like being bored. When we played Hamburg, we sometimes had an 8-hour stretch to fill. We tried to learn enough songs so we didn't have to repeat them. Some bands just had an hour set, took an hour off, and then played a whole hour set all over again. We tried to vary it because we decided we simply weren't going to survive otherwise. By the time we came back to England, we had a large repertoire. I think when we started making records, that idea persisted. Why repeat ourselves? Why make the same record twice? It's true that, as I've said, there was a certain formula to some of the early songs, the recurrence of the pronouns, I, you, me, him, her, my, she. But that was because we wanted to be in contact with the fans, to engage with them. But they weren't formulaic. What made the Beatles such a great band was that no 2 tracks are the same. It's pretty amazing when you think of that output. The other thing is that John and I wrote close to 300 songs in sessions lasting just a few hours or a single day, and we never ever came away from one of those sessions without finishing a song. Whenever we sat down to write a song, we didn't leave that room until we had one.
One day you look.
Traditionally, for me, that first 10 seconds, first 3 seconds actually, that's when I'm done. When after that completed riff right there, I'm like, God, this is already annoying me. We went from rock and roll music to this. That is what a vibe shift. I'm not into it. And I will say it took me a long time to come around for I'll Follow the Sun, like a long time.
Someday you'll know I was the one.
Real quick, just want to check something. Just want to make sure that I have this correct. I'm just not a ballad person. I'm not a ballad person. So I usually will immediately shark them off. I will say that George music does get me more ballady in general, and I give him a lot more leeway than I do the other Beatles. Sorry.
To see I've gone for tomorrow.
Wait, so according to Wikipedia, according to Walter Everett, who is a music theorist specializing in popular music who teaches at the University of Michigan, according to Wikipedia, sorry, John just did harmony vocal and George did the guitar, the electric rhythm guitar and the guitar solo.
Rain, so I'll follow the sun.
So this song is really interesting because John only sang on this. Paul did lead and harmony vocals, obviously, and the acoustic guitar. John sang harmony vocals. And then George did the electric rhythm guitar and the solo. And obviously Ringo was on her. I will say that this line is where I was like, okay, maybe I'll come around. Like, someday you'll know I was the one. Man, all of my shit that I'm saying today makes me sound so angry. I was angry. I was a very angsty teen. I was a very mean kid. Very mean is like so mean to myself. I was a very sad kid and was just so misunderstood. When I'm thinking about these songs, thinking about their target audience, teens, you know, you're appealing to the emotions and all this stuff, even though he's singing about Liverpool. That line of someday you'll know I was the one, I like that line. I don't think it's as angry as some places have said. I read somewhere, and it may have been the Stephen D. Stark book, I'm just gonna drag it, saying that John usually goes inward and beats himself up in love situations, whereas Paul will project his anger out to others. Since I read that, I've only been listening to Beatles for Sale, so I haven't really tried to explore elsewhere. But with John, I'm like, I don't know about all that.
Now the time has come, and so my love, I must go.
This is such an optimistic way to view a relationship, and that's why it's really interesting that this was about Liverpool. All of the guitar bits from George are really sweet in this song. I think that they're just really sweet. Okay, now we're gonna take a break and I'll be back.
Mr. Moonlight.
This song is so divisive. I mean, this song will split up families. This song is nope. Not a funny joke. It seems like you love it or you hate it. In Anthology, Neil Aspinall talks. Neil Aspinall is the Beatles, like, he has had several titles, but he's like basically he's their Neil. He manages them. He's their life caddy. He just makes sure that they function. Neil was talking about how performing Mr. Moonlight was really fun. He said, Mr. Moonlight was great because there would be this moment of tension in the audience. The song would be announced and everybody knew that John would have to start on that note, the Mr. Moonlight. There was no chord to precede it and he had to get it right from nothing. It's several hours later, okay? Let's not beat around the bush. Let's not lie. I maybe looked up a few things and then fell down a rabbit hole and kept looking up a few things. And then maybe I made dinner and watched a couple episodes of Dragon Ball Z. Who are you to judge me? You're watching me on YouTube. Maybe we look inward. Mr. Moonlight. This is what Paul said about Mr. Moonlight during that Thank Your Lucky Stars performance. This is the second one we didn't write. It was originally the B-side of Dr. Feelgood and one of the numbers we played at the Cavern. I play a bit of organ softly in the background and John and I do the singing. Ringo got a hold of a horn-shaped sort of conga drum for this with good effect. I'm not gonna lie, guys. I have several sources. It's a lot of books. I've been working on this for a while and I remember some things. I looked for this clip bit, quote, couldn't find it anywhere, but now we are on my final section of filming and I have, I don't know, like 12, 13, 14, 15 books, 2, 3, 4, 5 articles, 6 articles. It has one video link, but there are several video links. So I'm not going through all of that to find this quote, just to look for, it was something about Mr. Moonlight being so unpopular that it was upsetting for John because it was like his baby or it was special to him. But I just cannot remember where it came from. And honestly, I'm not gonna look. 15 books. I have to go through 15 of my books. So let's operate under the assumption that John really loved Mr. Moonlight. The more I was looking, people really hate this song. They think it's slow. I'm trying to think like rock and roll music, then All Follow the Sun. So we have the, and I would have been annoyed by that. But then we've got Mr. Moonlight, okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the end of All Follow the Sun. So we're kind of experiencing the lead into Mr. Moonlight to try to replicate what someone might hate about it. Because maybe we dig into that. Maybe we become a little bit more objective, Lars.
Mr. Moonlight.
I like this first 8 seconds. I think John sounds amazing, obviously. Try not to simp. Be objective. Be objective.
And from your beam you
Okay, so we've got good... Is George singing in this? I'm not doing that. I'm not doing it. I don't see anything worth complaining about. I have to say though, I've also see elsewhere that George was playing the African drum and Ringo was just doing percussion. So gonna mention that before somebody gets mad. This is some really beautiful harmony. What are we mad about?
You sent us love.
I really like this though. I think it goes kind of hard.
I think you're fine, 'cause we love you.
John sounds really good here. And I just think it's really like, it's just a fun little dance, you know? Let's take a listen to the original, huh? So we've got it from Dr. Feelgood.
Star moonlight.
Yes, not bad that one.
Funny. Okay, hang on. I'm gonna keep... This is the Anthology 1 version.
One summer night.
Okay, so that's Ringo. Listening to that drum, no offense to George, but he wasn't playing like that.
And from the world you sent.
This is the Anthology 1 version, so would this be including Ringo's also percussion? I don't see that being George playing it, right?
And the night you don't come my way, I pray.
John sounds awesome! Oh my god, I love this version. I'm not going to play the Anthology version every time. So, update, did not do this objectively, wound up defending the hell out of the song, but it's more that I can't find my flaws.
'Cause we love you, Mr. Moonlight.
I understand that the harmony must be off-putting because I think I found it, I don't know if I found it off-putting or if I found it like, I found it like intriguing. It piqued my interest. Okay, that part. I don't know when that kind of harmony was most popular. I think it maybe is just off-putting to people. It endeared me to them.
Begging if you please.
I really like that. And how can we not love the boom, 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 boom? How can we not love it? So we need to talk about this organ here. Remember when I said, remember that? This was something that was highly criticized. The Beatles were taken with, like I said before, a lot of black music, R&B, old blues, jazz. They really liked the sound of Booker T and the Funk Brothers, Ray Charles, who we know the organ player, of course, was Billy Preston. And these are all bands that had a dedicated organ player. they wanted to replicate that sound by using this organ. So now we have this organ. And by the way, from what I understand, Mr. Moonlight was not a super well-known song. So what I said before about already having, or maybe it's later, that we already had these lyrics in our repertoire, that's not so much true here. So maybe that also brought some of that criticism that I was looking for when I was objectively reviewing this song. So I just wanted to include that, and thank you to the patron who reminded me about this. I'm trying to get on the side of the consumer here, right? So rock and roll music, we can obviously overlook that. I'll Follow the Sun, it's a slower vibe, and maybe it's off-putting. I don't know. I'm trying to see it, but I wasn't involved in the music scene in 1964. But this isn't just 1964. This is like across the fandom now. It's still very unpopular. I love this. I don't know. I think it adds a lot of variety to the album. I read somewhere that there was like a committee to pick the songs for this album, but I saw that a couple hours ago and I was like, bitch, we don't have time.
Begging if you please.
We have to draw a line somewhere. You know what I'm saying?
'Cause we love you.
Okay, and now we have Kansas City. Kansas City, which I don't have any notes about Kansas City. I just don't. It's a good song. You know, I like it. It's also divisive, but like not so much. I think the Beatles really liked it. The first 7 seconds of all these songs are like popping off. That is really hardcore. This one is when you stop and you break it down, you listen for the bass. Listen for the piano. Stop and listen for the drums. There's so much going on there. It's so much more than just another cover. I feel like people don't give it its layers or whatever. They're just like, oh, this was somebody else's song. This is some weird counting because we know 7, 8, 9? 9? Weird, right? But I like it. Every valid criticism of this song is now gone. Just because of this solo, goodbye. They mean it, right? Here's Little Richard's. Can we just revisit? Okay. I know what my preference is. Now, I do like Little Richard a lot, though. So we have encountered a cat emergency. I will come back later. This one is neat, but I don't have any notes for it. Crisis resolved. And for reasons that will be explained later, 8 days a week comes last. So let's get started on Words of Love. For 7 seconds, still keeping up here. I don't have any notes on this song. I think it's just a fun little jam. I read somewhere in one of the books, and I didn't find it anywhere in any of my notes, that Ringo slapped his knees.
Tell me how you feel.
So I don't know if the knee slapping is part of it. I just remember that somewhere, and it's in my notes as Ringo's slaps knees ? And then I can't find it anywhere else. So I don't know what happened there.
Tell me love is real.
There's obviously hand clapping though. I really like this harmony, the use of the echo. This all sounds really nice. It blends very well, but there's a lot of distinction as well, if that makes sense. A distinction between the voices is what I mean.
Darling, I love you.
The percussion and the clapping together, I don't know, it adds a pep in the step, I guess. And then this, now this, well, I gotta tell you guys, honestly, this, it's just good fun. I call like a jam band song where it just kind of feels like they're enjoying themselves. You know how George dances. You can see him dancing and playing that, right? It's basic. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily to be expected or anything, but it's a good song. It's not like, oh my God, it's earth-shattering, but it is very fun. And for what it is, it's certainly a refreshing take on this kind of ballad. Honey Don't, which I love this song so much. I really love this song. In Anthology, Ringo said, "We all knew Honey Don't. It was one of those songs that every band in Liverpool played. I used to love country music and country rock. I'd had my own show with Rory Storm when I would do 5 or 6 numbers, so singing and performing wasn't new to me. It was a case of finding a vehicle for me with the Beatles. That's why we did it on Beatles for Sale. It was comfortable, and I was finally getting one track on a record. My little featured spot. Very cute." I love this song so much. I've been known to play this song on repeat for an embarrassing amount of time.
Say you will when you won't. Say you do.
I love this song. It's such a vibe, and I know lots of people dislike how Ringo sings. I certainly do not. I think Ringo's voice is very charming. I am also easily pleased, can we say. I don't need an impressive amount of talent to enjoy something. If it gives me good vibes and it makes me happy, then I'm very happy.
Well, honey, don't. Well, honey, don't.
They all disagree with me a lot about Ringo, and that's okay. You can be wrong about things too. It's hard. I understand. I'm often wrong.
Honey, don't.
Y'all can be wrong sometimes. I still love you. That being said, before we get to the next part, I gotta talk about this. Hang on.
Honey, don't.
That little voice crack. I love it so much. A little imperfection goes a long way with me, and they're honestly not going to continue retaping with Ringo to get it perfect, because why?
Honey, don't.
It's so fun to listen to. Why don't you guys like this song? What is wrong with you? Is something wrong with... No, nothing's wrong with me. I'm perfect. This is my land.
Honey, don't. Honey, don't.
How can I be wrong? Oh, this song is so great.
Honey, don't.
I think it's probably, now that I'm thinking, it's because when they're so used to hearing John and Paul, they want to hear John and Paul. That's the Beatles. That this person sounds very different from them. This is, what's wrong with this? Why are you guys hating on Honey Don't? Do I have a Honey Don't on here? Here we go.
Well, how come you say you will when you won't? You tell me you do, baby, when you don't.
Shh, Carl Perkins killing it. The music takes me even there visually. Knowing how the band plays, I think it really takes me there. But I guess if you're not willing to give Ringo a shot to begin with, then you would immediately dismiss the song. But you shouldn't dismiss Ringo just off of principle, off rip. He's feeling it. Let him feel it. Let my boy sit up.
Well, sometimes I love you on a Saturday night.
All right, I'm going to recycle this joke that I had from my first Beatles for Sale joke. So, here, we're just going to put it right here because, yeah. Let's talk about the lyrics just for a second. He says, "Sometimes I love you on a Saturday night, but Sunday morning, you don't look right. You've been out painting the town. Honey, been stepping around." In this scenario, how fast is this chick getting dressed and going out and painting the town after she was loving Ringo on a Saturday night. I mean, damn. Honey don't, but also honey damn. You know what I'm saying? Impressively fast to go out and cheat. Very rude, but impressive.
Terrible. Yes. But great.
I say you will when you won't. Honey, don't.
This has to be one of my breakthrough favorites to a degree that I can't understand, because no matter how many times I try to keep myself from singing this when I film, I can't help it. I always break into it. This is also featured on Get Back, so we need to talk about that. It's not their best moment, but it's good. You know, it works, whatever.
Walking beside her.
Very good first 3 seconds.
When I'm walking beside her.
That's a good first 7 seconds as well. Am I gonna just start checking the first 7 seconds of every Beatles song just because of YouTube copyright? Yeah. From all the songs, the story behind every Beatles release by Jean-Michel, Guesdon, and Phillipe Margotin. I'm actually gonna put these author names on the screen. Every Little Thing was the first title they worked on that day. George was not at this first session. It took only 4 takes to tape it. After 3, they nailed down the rhythmic part with John on acoustic guitar, Paul on bass, and Ringo on the drums. Although Paul is the author of the song, he only sang in unison and harmonized the choruses. John had the lead vocal. The next day, they resumed recording with George. According to Mark Lewisohn, the atmosphere was light and carefree. After 5 more takes, they added the intro using the Rickenbacker 12-string, a low tone at the piano performed by Paul, and for the first time, Ringo playing the timpani. In the intro, we can hear Paul in the left channel of the stereo hit a chord on his bass, which he muffles to guide the guitar overdub. There are questions about the writing and recording of Every Little Thing. John performed the guitar solo using his famous Rickenbacker. Paul reportedly confirmed in 1964 that John played an electric guitar riff while George played the acoustic guitar. It is possible, but George was absent during the first session on September 29th when they recorded the basic track. So who played the acoustic guitar? It is a mystery. There's some controversy surrounding Every Little Thing, which is one of the reasons why I'm really glad that I stopped and did a little extra research, because interesting. So I'm gonna go ahead and just read this. So let's just start with a little background. According to Wikipedia, 3 authors, Ian MacDonald, Kenneth Womack, and John Wynne, all say that George was the lead guitarist in this song. This is directly from Wikipedia. For the same reasons I said before about going through all the books, I'm not gonna add. So it says, in their retrospective lineups for the song, authors Ian MacDonald and Kenneth Womack each credit Harrison for the lead guitar part, played on a Rickenbacker 12-string, and Lennon as the acoustic rhythm guitarist. Author John Wynne also names Harrison as the lead guitarist, saying he played the Rickenbacker on the basic track and the subsequent overdubs. So let's just go with that, because I don't know. I just feel...
Yes, I know I'm a lucky guy.
Is a breakthrough for me, like a breakthrough song as in I do my very, very, very best not to... Sorry, I got excited, I think. I do my very, very best to not sing when I'm recording, because I'm not a singer.
Every little thing she does.
That harmony, come on. Listen.
She does for me, yeah.
Not to mention the percussion here and the guitar percussion.
She does.
Boom, boom. This is that bitter Paul.
She does.
I'm trying not to sing.
She does.
That sounds like George to me. When I'm listening to this, I'm happy just to know that she loves me, because I know love will never die, or whatever. The first 7 seconds of this one too, hang on. Okay, anyway, I don't have a lot in the way of notes of this song. Really, it's just fun. It's good to hear George singing it.
I would hate my disappointment to show.
I really love this because George is the harmony vocal of this song. And obviously Paul's in the chorus, but
if she turns up while I'm gone, please let me know.
George's voice is so delicious. And I mean that like not in some weird sexy way. I mean that so whenever we get to hear him and his voice actually showcased in any way, shape, or form in the Beatles, we should relish it. And I certainly do.
There's no fun in what I do when she's not there.
And I don't want to forget to mention that John sounds really good too.
I think I'll take a walk and look for her.
And of course, then Paul comes in and it sounds really different, but it sounds really good. Obviously, love the tambourine as well. I always felt like this was kind of a weird Beatles song because I'm kind of like, I can't imagine any of you leaving a party. But it sounds happy, right?
She's made me sad.
We always hear the rhythm is in the guitars. That's what the Beatles used to say back when they were the Quarrymen and they didn't have a regular drummer. And you can always hear it with the rhythm. What you're doing. Don't have any notes. Such a good first 3 seconds. So solid. We're not quite into it by the time we hit the 7 seconds. You know what I'm saying? Hang on. Go back.
You got me running.
That riff is really great. George, he slays these good little pretty riffs with that beautiful ability and that slide. It's just so distinctive.
Why should it be so much to ask of you?
When I think of being exhausted and being overtaxed, I'm not seeing that in any of these songs. Like even these like slower songs.
Here for you, wondering what you're gonna do.
That's the best part of this song right there. It's so good.
Well, it took some honey.
I'm back.
Everybody's trying to be my baby. Everybody's trying to be.
Is great. The echo on the vocals, awesome. What is it with George's voice that like, it's so unique?
Everybody's trying to be my baby now.
I mean, obviously, so is John's. Like, well, and Paul's. Obviously, all of their voices are unique. But like, what is it? What is it? I need a word for George's voice. There's no word for it. There's just something in it. It's like an extra spice. As simple as this song can be, and especially since it's a cover, it still sounds really Beatlesy. It's very fun. I very much enjoy it. Shocking, I'm sure. Is it my favorite song? No. On this record in general, no.
Well, last night I didn't say late.
As we know, as we've heard, I love George vocals, love hearing George's voice. Am disappointed that this is the only one we got with George, obviously. And I'm going to reuse a joke again. Sorry. 19 dates would be a lot of dates. Like, how fast would you go through those dates? And what goes on those dates? Is this just a dinner thing? Don't say that.
Dude.
You can't say that.
I'm definitely, absolutely censoring that.
This is a really good bookend to this album, though. Even though I do 8 days a week at the end, and this is a great end for this album. With that kind of slowish, ballady middle, and ramping back up with every little thing, I don't want to spoil the party, kind of like a fun thing, and then what you're doing, which is very different. And then we're ending with some nostalgic song that everybody knows. The lyrics are already in your internal database. It already means something to you. It's a fun song, and it's actually a smart move. But, you know, painful lapse in professionalism, I guess. This song is very emotional for me. It means a lot to me, and we'll get into that in a minute. but that doesn't mean that I'm going to skip over the extra information. In a 1984 interview with Playboy, Paul said that 8 Days a Week, the title, came from one of Ringo's malapropism, like A Hard Day's Night. But that's not actually the origin of the story. Paul told in an interview for the 8 Days a Week documentary about what really happened.
You should tell them how you got to that title.
8 days a week, yeah, because I was driving out to John's house. This is the song title, and I'd been banned from driving because I'd had a speeding offence, and so I had to have a driver take me out to John's house. So I'm just saying to the driver, saying, "How you doing? You know, great. You've been working hard." He says, "Oh, 8 days a week." So I go into John's, got the title, here we go.
John didn't really like 8 Days a Week. He said, 8 Days a Week was Paul's effort at getting a single for the movie. That luckily turned to Help, which I wrote, bam bam, like that, and got the single. 8 Days a Week was never a good song. We struggled to record it and struggled to make it into a song. It was his initial effort, but I think we both worked on it. Paul goes on to tell the same story about 8 Days a Week title, and he says, John and I were always looking for titles. Once you've got a good title, if someone says, what's your new song, and you have a title that interests people, you are halfway there. Of course, the song has to be good. If you've called it 1 a.m. on my way to a party with you, babe, they might say, okay, but if you've called it 8 Days a Week, then they say, oh yes, that's good. A Hard Day's Night, you've almost captured them. That's a really good, strong 7 seconds, actually. So I do have some additional 8 Days a Week information, and 8 Days a Week strikes a specific chord in my heart. I will say that if you wanted a song... if you wanted a song break down the same way that the other songs were broken down, I doubt that this is going to end up that way. I'm not emotional right now, but I usually get very emotional when it comes to this song. It gets a little dark. It's not like super bad, but if you want to say goodbye here, no judgments, don't blame you. Not everybody wants to watch me cry, but honestly, I think a lot of people do, so let's watch me cry. I'm not planning on it, but I know I will. Like, it's not, okay. Before I add my additional research here, if we're taking out my personal attachment to this song, I would actually almost lump it in with Can't Buy Me Love and A Hard Day's Night. There's kind of this commercial feel to it. We're gonna hear in a minute about how John feels about this song, and you'll see what I mean. The movie-driven purposes behind some of these songs, I do think that it sometimes shows in the music. And I do think without my personal attachment to this, maybe I would feel similarly to 8 Days a Week as I do to Can't Buy Me Love, which is kind of like, you know what I mean? According to all the songs, the story behind every Beatles release, authors' names on screen just to be safe, the recording notes with the CD booklet of the 2009 remaster mentions a timpani. But according to the book, if there was a timpani, the instrument must be buried in the mix. We can hear Ringo's low tom-tom, but no timpani as in Every Little Thing. What's important about 8 Days a Week is that this was the first time the Beatles brought in an unfinished song to the studio and continued working on it throughout the session, which is something that became standard practice for them going forward. And there were several different intros tried out. We started with an acoustic guitar intro and toyed with that a little bit, and then a vocal intro. God, they sound so good, don't they? But then they toyed with it a little bit more. Here's a different version. I do believe that I like number 1 better, you know, if this was an eye appointment, but maybe that's because it's what I'm more familiar with. Who knows? They eventually settled on a guitar intro, which we'll hear, and that was recorded on October 18th, which was a different day from when they recorded 8 Days a Week, which was recorded in 2 sessions, totaling 7 hours, same day, 15-minute break in between them. Overtaxed. Exhausted. Doesn't sound like it on the record.
I would say to Brian, you know, I need more time in the studio. And he would dole out time like giving scraps to a mouse.
I have attached this really difficult time to this song. Things were already a little tough, and over the course of a week, my closest, probably, friend at the time attempted suicide twice in 1 week. And both times I was the one to intervene. The first time was a little serious and the second time was much more serious. On the way there, it's like a 20-minute drive. 8 Days a Week comes on the radio. And I was so scared. And for some reason, that song just felt like a hug. Just like I need you. It had been a really difficult time already, and I just felt so held, and I knew I was going into a really bad situation. And it was, right? You know, and it's by far not the worst thing I've ever been through. I've been through much more traumatic things, and yet this one is the one that, like, I'm so sorry. This got a lot darker than I meant for it to be, but it is just the truth. Love me. And it's just like this kind of busy, hold me, love me. There's just so much there. It's like, love me. It's so full that it surrounds you. Maybe that commercialism that I mentioned earlier, perhaps that might be the culprit of the fullness of this song that made me feel so surrounded that evening. 8 days a week. I knew this song, I'd heard it before. Everybody's heard it before, right? 8 days a week. One thing I can say, I love you all the time. Even when it hurts, even when it scares me. I love you all the time. I love you. Shit. I ain't got nothing but love. I'm so helpless in this moment. This is all I have, is 8 days a week. Don't... John's vocalization right there is really intense and it's very good. 8 days a week. The harmony is really good here, and this is the line that really breaks me because you can really hear them all there and you do feel hold me, love me. Love you all the time. That unconditional love. You know, it's a sacrifice sometimes. This is not obviously what they meant by this song. It's just a fun song. For me, it means a lot more, and that's just part of it. I love the outro of it. It feels triumphant, like the triumph and victory that you can find in love. I don't regularly listen to 8 Days a Week. I listen to it when I listen to the album, but I don't regularly put myself through emotional chaos. The reason why I cry on my channel, the reason why I cry to this song and just leave it up, is because I feel it would be a disservice to the Beatles, to art, music in general, and to myself to ignore the big emotions that can come with music that moves you, music that gets you through tough times, and tough times themselves, what that means and how you persevere through them. Why can't we be real about this? I think it's important. But with all that being said, I think we can all agree on something, right? Beatles for Sale deserves justice. Thank you all so much for visiting my land. I would absolutely love it if y'all would like and subscribe and all of that jazz, or check out my Patreon at patreon.com/LarsLand. I love y'all so much. And y'all come back now, you hear? Bye.
My sweet Lord. My Lord. My Lord. But it takes so long, my Lord. My sweet Lord.